Hey guys, it's Chris, and this is going to be another Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire bonus video. Well, I guess they're not really bonus videos if it's your, consistent content. So anyway, a regular video about religion in Westeros, or Essos, Planetos, the world of Ice and Fire. Are there gods in our story? Alright, so I wanted to do this quick little video because I've been saying for a long time now actually that I don't believe there are any gods in Westeros, and I've had a lot of questions about it in Q&As, etc. Now, with all that being said, I don't think we're ever going to get a definitive answer from George R. R. Martin in the books, or the TV show for that matter, about whether there are higher powers at work here. So anyway, there are a lot of religions in Westeros, and Essos for that matter, around the world as far as the world of Ice and Fire. I won't go into all these because I want to keep this relatively short, but I want to talk about some of the major ones. I will quickly mention a couple of the lesser religions or lesser known religions. You have a lot in Essos, but I want to talk about the major religions and a little bit of evidence to support that they may not in fact be actual gods, more likely just magic wrapped in a little mythos and ideas constructed by people to kind of put something in a box that they don't really understand. So anyway, in our story we have some of the major religions that we're aware of, and that is the Faith of the Seven. We have the Red God R'hllor, or the Lord of Light. Now, of course, that religion is not actually that big. It's just more known to us because of characters like Melisandre. We have the Drowned God, we have the Many-Faced God, the Storm God, and we'll get to a few of those in a minute as far as evidence. But really quickly, just for the sake of, giving you guys a little more information, I'll mention a couple of these lesser-known religions over in Essos. You have the religion of the Black Goat of Qohor. Now, this is a little religion in Qohor where people worship an actual black goat, and they require human sacrifice. You had the Valyrian Religion, several different religions in Valyria, and the old Valyrian freehold where the Targaryens come from, and they actually named a lot of their dragons, these old dragon lords did, after some of their deities. Of course, you have the Great Stallion. We're very familiar with this religion due to the Dothraki. That's what they follow. They follow the Great Stallion. They believe in their prophecy of the stallion that melts the world was going to unify all the Khalasars, but there's not really any evidence that there's ever been any intervention of this Great Stallion. Of course, you have the Great Shepherd as well, which is of the Lazarene people. Now, if you're not familiar with Lazarene people, you saw Mirri Maz Duur on the show. She was a Lazarene. She talked about the Great Shepherd, and they were kind of the antithesis of the Great Stallion. And of course, you have the Many-Faced God. Now, the Many-Faced God origins is really simple. The Great Valyrian freehold, of course, where the Targaryens are descended from, had slaves, and they used those slaves to mine precious metals such as copper and gold, etc. And in the mines of old Valyria, it was horrible, horrible conditions. You're talking about volcanic activity. You had the 14 flames around, which is the 14 volcanoes that ended up exploding, which was called the Doom of Valyria, which ultimately destroyed the empire, except of course for the famous Valyrians, the Targaryens, who happened to leave Valyria before that happened. But anyway, back in these slave mines, the conditions were so horrible that people actually prayed for death to get the hell out of there. So one day in history, whether it was a slave or a slaver, it's really unknown, somebody started granting that wish to people. When people prayed for death, they obliged and gave it to them. So they started calling it the gift. And then, of course, that started to spread a little bit. Now, of course, at first they were only killing slaves, praying for death. But then this person heard a slave not praying for his own death, but praying for the death of his master. And so this founder of the Many-Faced God religion basically said, okay, and killed the fucking master. So that's how that religion started to grow within the minds of Valyria, and they called it the Many-Faced God. We're very familiar with that based off Jack and Hagar and Arya's storyline over in the House of Black and White. And basically, they don't care what religion you are. They accept that there are other religions, but they basically have the thought that, you know what, doesn't matter what you believe or who you worship or what God you call what, in the end, you're going to the same place, and that's what their religion is based off of. So it basically is death. And there's really not many moral values in that religion as well, because they are, in fact, a cult of assassins. But anyway, you get the idea. There are lots and lots of religions in the story, old and new. You have the Lion of Night, you have the Merling King, you have the Weeping Woman. Several religions in several different locations around the globe. But let's talk about some of the more familiar religions in our story and some evidence that they may not actually be gods at work at all. So first, let's talk about the Faith of the Seven real quick. Now, the Faith of the Seven was a religion where the Andals brought it over about 6,000 years before our story started. And think of the Faith of the Seven sort of like the Crusades in real life, where the Andals, a second group of men, came over to Westeros and invaded and started cutting down weirwood trees again, and they brought and spread the Faith of the Seven. It is now the dominant religion of our story. Basically, they worship a single deity with 7 different aspects or 7 different faces. That is the mother, the father, the maiden, the warrior, the smith, the crone, and the stranger. and basically they represent different aspects of humanity: death, strength, forgiveness, fertility, etc. And that's basically it. There is no evidence in our story anywhere in the books or show that praying to the face of the seven has any result whatsoever. So what about the old gods? The old gods, of course, are the oldest gods in our story as far as we know, at least in Westeros. And of course we know that because the children of the forest apparently worship the old gods, and some of the first men who they warred with, of course, took up the old gods, mainly up in the northern region. Now, of course, the religion of the old gods is basically a nature religion where they think there's spirits in every rock and tree and animal, etc. And basically it's kind of like paganism in the real world. So we know that's what the children of the forest again worshipped, and then of course they spread that, and some of the first men took up that religion as well. But I think the children of the forest sold the first men a bill of goods. They may have believed in some nature stuff as far as, you know, different deities in the rocks and stones and rivers, etc. But we know now, because of Bloodraven and now Bran, that they have something called Green Seers. Now, Green Seers, of course, is somebody who can sit in a tree connected to werewood.net, the Werewood Tree Network, and see things through time and space all over the damn place, wherever a werewood tree may be. Of course, this is why they went to war with the first men in the first place. The first men came over initially, started moving up, taking their lands, and cutting down their werewood trees, and they had a problem with that. And now, of course, we've seen Bloodraven train with Bran, and Bran becoming the last Green Seer. So basically, since there was a war between the first men, not just over land, but cutting down werewood trees, because that was part of the agreement when they had the pact and ended the war, we know that there were probably always Green Seers there, and they were the ones sitting in werewood.net, seeing everything all over the place, and kind of spying on the first men. So there was very likely a Green Seer there before Bloodraven got there, and one before that one, etc. And now Bran has taken up that mantle. Now, of course, now we see the power of Bran and Bloodraven, what he's able to do. They're able to go back in time and see visions, able to see the past. And apparently these events are also DVR'd into the trees as far as werewood.net, and are accessible anytime, any place, as long as you have a werewood tree nearby to kind of kick off your vision. So more than likely the children had always spied on the first men and kind of kept watch over them. And we know now, seeing Bran in the visions, in the books he whispered Winterfell to his father while he was praying under a werewood tree in his first vision. And in the show, of course, he saw his father at the Tower of Joy the first time and said, "Father," and Ned turned around. So we know that the past can somehow be modified at least just a little bit as far as them affecting things. So that kind of kept the first men under control, I would assume, and made them take up the old gods themselves. So basically, I believe that the old gods are the Green Seers, and by that definition, that would make Bran now an old god. Now, I'm not saying Bran would label himself an old god, but I think that's basically what he is. For example, when he saw Ned in the vision at the Tower of Joy, and he said "Father," and Ned turned around, well, Ned would then believe that was something supernatural, when we know that it was Bran using magic, basically his gift and abilities in his DNA, his blood magic, so to speak. And werewood.net is fed off blood, which is hinted throughout the books. So I think basically that the old gods are essentially Green Seers like Bran. So Bran essentially is an old god. And that brings us to the last one we'll talk about in this little video, just to keep it short for time. And that is the religion of R'hllor, the Red God, or better known as the Lord of Light. Of course, we know this god through Melisandre. This is the one that's the most interesting because we actually see evidence that there's some kind of higher power at work here. Possibly. Or is it just magic that these people can tap into, blood magic for example, to make these things happen? Now in the show, and the books for that matter, Melisandre says that most of the things she does requires nothing more than powders and potions, basically tricks to trick men into believing this or that, to make a fire burn a certain color, to make a fire really huge, to make people shit their pants, whatever. She basically admits that most of the stuff she does is potion just to spread the word of the Lord of Light, to try to get people to believe in the Lord of Light, being that part of her job as a priestess of the Lord of Light is to spread the word and gain new followers. Now her and other red priests such as Qohor in the book obviously have some kind of power. Now they believe they get it from this so-called R'hllor character, but here's the thing. They believe and have been taught by their own religious practice that their antithesis, the enemy of the Lord of Light, has to have an enemy, right? Has to have a dark side, is the great other. Now we know from the show, and more likely the books will be the same way, although it'll probably go down a lot differently, that the children of the forest created the White Walkers, who are supposed to be the champions of the great other. So now obviously from the reader standpoint or the viewer standpoint, there is no great other, therefore there likely is not a R'hllor. So they are getting power from somewhere, but in my opinion it's just magic they can tap into, blood magic, etc., that they don't really understand how it works, they just know they can do it. And a lot of it has to do with so-called King's blood, which we know as Valyrian/Targaryen blood for our story, and that's the way that these powers seem to come about. So someone may say, well, what about Jon? He got resurrected from the dead. And Melisandre seemed to play a part in that, and she probably did. She did some kind of ritual. She did burn some of his hair, at least in the show. We don't know how this is going to happen in the books. It looked to be some kind of fire/blood magic because his DNA was in that hair. So it has something to do with his blood, obviously. Now the question is If they had walked out of that room and she didn't say the magic words, please, would Jon have got up from that table? In other words, is it Melisandre who performed this ritual and brought Jon back to life based off some knowledge she had learned from her own religion? Or if she walked out of that room and never even tried, saying she couldn't do it, would Jon have gotten up off that table alone by himself because of his secret magical blood of being Targaryen and Stark lineage? Now that brings into question Beric Dondarrion being resurrected 6 times by Thoros of Myr. Of course, Thoros of Myr is the Red Priest that originally went to King's Landing. He then followed Beric Dondarrion, being his good friend. They are now in the Brotherhood Without Banners. He of course brought him back 6 different times, and the last time being when the Hound killed him. Now in the books, Beric has already died and given his life up to resurrect Catelyn Stark, becoming Lady Stoneheart. But in the show, he's still alive, and Thoros himself said that he was basically a drunken old priest sent to King's Landing to recruit people for the Lord of Light, and he never really believed anything. But his friend Beric got killed one day, and he just said the words that he was taught, and he came back to life. Now the question is, does Thoros have that power? Could he do that to anybody, or is it something special about Beric Dondarrion only? And then of course we have shadow babies. Shadow babies who killed Renly Baratheon and about damn near killed Stannis. So what I mean by that is, when Stannis gave his seed to Melisandre to make the shadow baby, it damn near killed him. We even see in the show, for that matter, where she says, let's make another son, and Melisandre is about to go get Gendry or whatever for his king's blood, his Valyrian blood, and Melisandre says to Stannis,
make me another son.
I cannot.
Why?
You don't have the strength. It would kill you.
So now with that, is she getting this power from the Lord of Light, from some god somewhere, or is it some magic she knows? She just labels it a god, and she has to have the seed of somebody of Valyrian descent. It took Stannis having Valyrian blood to create this shadow baby, and she even tried to create one with Jon at the wall when she tried to start seducing him, because she could immediately sense something was special about Jon. Of course, we know now that's been confirmed. That's because he has Valyrian blood as well, being Rhaegar's son. And of course, Melisandre also has visions and flames, and I've said this many, many times, I don't think she's seeing visions from the Lord of Light. I think she's seeing visions being sent to her somewhere, or perhaps she just learned the power through her own religious studies, being a special person herself, whatever descent she's from, apparently from Ashai. Now in the book, she sees Bran and Bloodraven. She sees 1,000 eyes floating in the fire and a boy with a wolf's head who leans back and howls. And that, of course, represents Bloodraven and Bran, and she thinks that those two are the champions of the Great Other. Now, again, going back to my previous point, we now know that the Great Other does not exist. We know that the children created the Great Other's champions, the White Walkers, so therefore, in that sense, the children are the Great Other, although she doesn't know that, but she has labeled Bloodraven and Bran, in the books at least, the champions of the Great Other, and of course, we know now that they are essentially old gods, and they created the White Walkers, therefore in the reader's view at least, nullifying the idea of a Great Other, and therefore I think it nullifies the idea of a lore in the first place. George R. R. Martin has actually said himself that he didn't want to label anything one true God in this story. It's really for us to decide, but he's also said there's never really any true confirmation that any of these deities actually exist, which I think it kind of follows his personal beliefs, and that's what he kind of translated over to this story. I mean, Martin himself has said that basically something labeled as magic is basically something just not understood. It could be some form of technology. For example, Qyburn says to Jaime when he's fixing up his wrist stump where his hand used to be, that he had basically got kicked out of the Citadel and lost his chain for working on people that were alive. Now, I'm sure he was a mad scientist asshole who did a lot of bad things to a lot of people that were alive, but in some cases, we would call that surgery. Anyway, George R. R. Martin has said that he believes that in this world that magic is a real thing, and that it's misunderstood by most people. Most people have never experienced it, but when they do experience it, they don't understand it, so they kind of build this framework around it to explain it, and that's where religion comes from in the first place, at least in this story. So anyway, guys, I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Are gods real in this story, or is all this just taking place in the eye of a blue-eyed giant? Really appreciate all the support, so keep sharing these videos. Give me a thumbs up if you like what I do here. Thanks for everything, you guys. Really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.